Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, leftists, progressives, sports fans, and social radicals, and welcome to another edition of Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, left sports media, a weekly news hour highlighting the intersections overlapping the world of sports, activism, and radical politics. We are available for broadcast by Pacific Radio member network stations, college and community radio stations, and low-power FM stations, as many already are. If you can't listen live, we're also available via audio podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and through the Google Play Store. Audio streams of our podcast and video editions will be available through our website, nasradicalsports.com. To contact the show, it's at Nas Radio Sports on Twitter and Instagram, Not Another Sports Show on Facebook, or at nasradicalsports.com, or you can use the Nas Radio hashtag. Quick PSA before we get started this week. A Domestic Violence Awareness Month keynote talk will be taking place Tuesday, October 17th at 7 p.m. at Gregory Hall, room 112 at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, with Julie DeCaro. Julie DeCaro is a Chicago area sports writer with a background as an attorney for domestic violence issues. Having been targeted with online harassment for her courageous writing about athletes with allegations of gender-based violence, Julie DeCaro will speak on campus about the intersections of Chicago athletics, sexual assault, domestic violence, and what we can do about it. This program is free and open to the public. For more information, contact Molly McLay at mclay1@illinois.edu or 217-333-3137. Sponsored by the Women's Resources Center, Courage Connection, and the Student Cultural Programming Fee. Well, we have an absolute ton to talk about this week on the show. We have guest in studio with us. Activist and journalist Brian Dolinar is joining us for this episode to talk about a recent article that he wrote for Truthout.
Hey out there, folks. How you doing?
And we have a whole bunch to get into. Big props to Marshawn Lynch for wearing his Everybody versus Trump t-shirt to the most recent NFL game this past week. But then there was the really odd and concerning moment where a bunch of Raiders staffers all kind of stood around him while he was sitting for the anthem because he was the only member of the Raiders sitting or taking a knee during the anthem. And so they had a whole bunch of staffers kind of standing around him. And we all don't know why it is that Marshawn Lynch is sitting down because he's refusing to tell anybody why he's sitting. And this is great because in past years when he was at the Super Bowl and they had to make themselves available for media day, he got fined for not wanting to talk. And so he went out there during the Super Bowl media day preparations and was sitting here, and every answer to the question was, I'm just here so I don't get fined. I'm only here because I don't want to get fined. I'm just here so I don't get fined. So we're not going to find out why it is that he's doing this, but it's really cool to see him doing that, as well as the rookie quarterback of the Houston Texans, Deshaun Watson, who donated his first game check to the stadium workers, saying that many of them had talked about how they were affected by Hurricane Harvey, and he was going to donate this money to try to help get these stadium workers back on their feet economically and make sure that they were going to be taken care of, and said if they needed any more, just to let him know. So really cool moment there. And so we've got a ton to talk about this week in some NFL news. We've got some basketball news to get into, so we're going to get right into it with This Week in the NFL. Now, Brian, a lot of people say that sports and politics don't really mix, but over the last few months, we've seen a whole lot of political activism from athletes. Most notably, the Seattle Seahawks are taking the reins of really putting out a lot of the messages out there that when they had the mass movement against President Trump for his statements during the Alabama Senate race, when he was down there making those statements that, you know, he hopes that people who kneel for the anthem get those SOBs off the field. They released a statement that was very explicit as to why they would not be out for the national anthem that game, highlighting the issues of police impunity in killing in communities of color. And they've now started the Seattle Players Equality and Justice for All Action Fund, a, quote, tangible way for individuals or businesses to make a difference fighting injustice and inequality by supporting leadership and education programs, close quote. And so you have a number of these players who are having these conversations inside and outside of the locker room and continuing to really raise awareness on a number of these issues. Even former players who are no longer with the team, like one of their former kickers, Stephen Hauschka, talking about the importance of getting white allies into the movement, and that Hauschka made the point that a lot of this stuff's only going to change when white people start getting uncomfortable with it. And I think that's largely one of these points, that a lot of these issues about racist policing or, the civil rights violations that are happening, they only start to tend to change when white people get uncomfortable with it. And we've seen that going back to the 1960s. When you look at the civil rights movement and the data from the civil rights movement in the 1960s, we've seen white people being uncomfortable with the demonstrations, with the sit-ins, with the protests that happened. They thought in 1966, 86% of people, of white people, thought that the demonstrations were going to do negative damage to the civil rights cause for Black Americans. And we're seeing that exact same kind of thing here, where, there was the recent USA Today article that talked about how these players taking a knee when they're outside of the country at the game in London is making the country look bad, as if the racist policing and the shooting people and getting away with it by cops isn't making the country look bad, or Donald Trump isn't making the country look bad. It's a player taking a knee during a song. And these protests that we've seen happen, we talked about last week when Gus Wood was on the show, that these protests have gone to be incredibly important, but also kind of jumping the shark a little bit in their lack of importance. That they're more focused on these protests than ever. And it's not that they're protesting the anthem per se, it's that they're protesting the impunity of police to, shoot somebody and then get away with it, an unarmed person, and get away with it. And we're seeing these issues happen, and that's what they're protesting against, this structural white supremacy, structural injustice, structural inequalities that are at the heart of this system. And that's what the protests are highlighting. But we've gotten so wrapped up in the song that they're taking a knee during the song, or they're sitting during the song, that more people have gotten wrapped up in that and arguing that the song is the important thing that's the focus of this issue. And it feels like it's simultaneously really important because people are paying more and more attention to the symbolic protest, but it's also kind of jumped the shark in that a lot of people are just focused on the wrong thing, that you took a knee during a song. And I know recently you interviewed Brighton Mellett, local activist, who became kind of nationally known last July for his burning of an American flag and being arrested by the Urbana, Illinois Police Department. Do you kind of see any kind of overlaps here of these people who are upset about a flag or a song more so than like the actual civil rights violations, the actual human rights violations that are occurring?
Yeah, Neil, absolutely. This is part of the schizophrenic consciousness in the United States here, is that, we tout ourselves as the home of freedom and democracy, and we have the largest prison population on the planet. It's this kind of utter hypocrisy and blind avoidance of reality that gets us to focus on these symbols rather than really what is really the deal, which is cops shooting 3 people every day in this country, and the wide majority of them African Americans. The number of people, 2.3 million people locked up. These are the heart of the issues. This is why people are kneeling, and the media doesn't want to have a conversation about that.
Yeah, and it feels like a lot of people don't want to have the conversation on that point because you get into the very difficult discussion point where you can't really defend 2.3 million people being locked up. You can't really defend the impunity of police officers killing an unarmed person and then not even being charged with it. And so the people that are going to, start complaining have to pivot away from those points to, you made me sad because you didn't stand for a song that I like. And when you're making these, vast pronouncements of the country being, in freedom and justice for all, well, no, it's not. We're sitting at a point where it's not. It's very clearly, discernibly, factually not. And yet people are mad about it. And recently, there was a viral video that went out of 2 people sitting during the national anthem at a Lakers game, and a woman getting mad and walking up to them and throwing her soda on them because they sat during the national anthem.
Really?
And this is what we're getting to, where somebody's going to get hurt over this because we're so focused on this song being the issue of somebody not respecting this song or not respecting the national anthem or not respecting the Pledge of Allegiance, that we spend so much more time being angry about that or angry about shop windows being broken than people getting killed. And it's that weird schizophrenic idea where we're prioritizing property over actual human lives. That there's this prioritization of a shop window being busted. Well, that means it's bad and wrong and terrible. Then once that shop window got busted, that completely delegitimizes the movement. No, the movement's still completely valid. What caused a lot of the problems was when a police officer shot and killed somebody that was unarmed. And we've seen a lot of corporate glomming on with these anthem demonstrations and these anthem actions, with a lot of teams kneeling before the anthems even played just so they could say that they took a knee during it. And a lot of the corporate idea of this is a real movement that's gaining a lot of steam. I know, let's brand our identity as part of this. Let's brand our identity onto this. And Naomi Klein, in her book No Logo, has that really fantastic part talking about when Nike did that with the LGBT rights movement, that they glommed onto that movement to get the brand authenticity into Nike. And that's why now you can show that you're a big supporter of gay rights by wearing the $40 Be True t-shirts or the $180 Be True Nike shoes. That we've seen this protest movement go from being really, really important to also at the same time not being really important because of what the focus has ended up being on. And speaking of anthem protests, the Detroit Lions owner Martha Ford had a meeting with players where she told the players that she did not want them to kneel during the national anthem, and that if they chose not to kneel during the national anthem, she would put her name and her money behind issues that they were concerned about. Defensive end Cornelius Washington said, quote, "She just asked us not to take the knee and basically told us, she told us she would back and support financially as well as put her name on whatever issues we wanted to try to attack. But as far as the kneeling, she just, I guess, felt there were better ways to get the point across. And at this point, people know what we're kneeling for, so now we're trying to take that next step in the plan of action to foster changes. That's the next part, and that part she's willing to get behind," close quote. Which I think is largely part of this, that the symbolism of this protest started last year by the WNBA players. Let's not forget, it wasn't just Colin Kaepernick that started this, because Kaepernick even sat for 2 games during the preseason and nobody even noticed until they went and asked him, "Oh, hey, wait, why'd you sit?" And then he explained himself. It was the WNBA players who really started that movement and really started the summer before the NFL season having those protests and commandeering pregame and post-game conferences to have those conversations solely about policing and solely about the issues of why they were taking a knee during the anthem, why they were sitting during the national anthem. And so this is part of the movement, and it's the next progression into this movement of getting the money and moving into the next steps of this. So it's kind of interesting to see not only Capitol diverting the players' actions, but diverting the actions into kind of the tangible next step of what it should probably go to anyway. But we've also had the police respond. Miami's Fraternal Order of Police put up one picture of police officers going into the hotel in Las Vegas where there was a mass shooting by the 64-year-old white man in an act of terrorism, opening fire with a number of modified guns to be basically automatic weapons, shooting into a country music concert. And then they also put a picture up of kneeling NFL players, and they had this caption, quote, "2 groups of people, one in Seattle, one in Vegas, chose to take action last night in their own way. We support the hashtag police." They then said, quote, "Prayers to the victims. This is why police need militarized equipment in order to protect the innocent from evil." Close quote. And Brian, I know you've done a lot of work on the militarization of police forces over time. Why is this a bad idea to give the police militarized equipment?
Yeah, well, I did a story about the sheriff here in Champaign County acquiring an MRAP, one of these large tanks from Afghanistan, And
the mine-resistant armored personnel carriers?
Yeah, that's right. They were designed to withstand mine blasts. And we don't have too many of those in Urbana. And so the machine really hasn't been used that much. But the police have this kind of Armageddonist, kind of good versus evil, very biblical understanding of law and order that should not be touted in a democratic society. But this is at the core really what most police believe in, and they believe their duty is to defend the public against evil. And evil for them can be your corner drug dealer.
Anybody that's seen as a threat to them coming home safely at night, which, it's not the kind of Barney Fife, Andy Griffith, the community police officer. No, it's now the adversarial idea of policing that they want to dress up in the idea of community policing, but it's very much adversarial to where anybody could be a threat.
Right, and so whether it's black people with a crazy look in their eyes, whether it's immigrants, whether it's queer folks, they are a threat to police authority. And the police have deadly force to oppose that authority, and it should be held in check, but they are widely beyond their bounds.
Well, the Tulsa, Oklahoma Fraternal Order of Police referenced the Vegas mass shooting to try to score political points about protesting NFL players, saying, quote, "To the brave NFL players that ran into a hotel with an active sniper, never mind, those were police officers," close quote. Well, here's the thing. Those officers were doing their job. That's what their job was doing. That's their job. And if we're going to get into the idea about dangerous jobs, police officers don't rank in the top 10 of the most dangerous jobs. Probably one of the more dangerous jobs that we don't give nearly as much money or reference or deference to is the pizza delivery man.
Oh, yeah. I had a cousin who was a pizza delivery guy. He got jumped on real good one time.
Yeah, pizza delivery men. They're not armed, and they're not out here, trying to say that, they're making America better again by bringing you food. That they don't get guns, they don't get weaponry, they don't get militarized ideas. They also don't get a lot of the reference and the deference, but they're putting themselves out there in a really dangerous situation, going from house to house, not knowing if they're going to get to go home at night. And I don't mean to really make light of this by, highlighting the pizza delivery man aspect of this, but it's also, this is part, what they signed up to do and part of what their job is in this. And the idea of bravery or courage being this zero-sum game, that it's either the NFL players being brave or the police being brave, is a really disingenuous kind of statement. But when you look at those kind of statements, it hits back to what we talked about earlier. They can't discuss the impunity of officers getting away with murder. They can't talk about the 2.3 million people that have been locked up, many of them for nonviolent offenses. They can't talk about those issues, so they have to pivot to something else. And we even saw this with the Las Vegas Police Department and Michael Bennett. The Las Vegas Police Department said that before they even investigated the arrest of Michael Bennett, before they even investigated what their officers had done, they said that this was a obviously false statement that these allegations were obviously false before the investigation was even done. They also said that we believe that a fair investigation will establish that they've done nothing wrong. So they're already assuming that they've done nothing wrong, and that once they do the investigation, they're going to find out that they've done nothing wrong. And when they say, we believe in fair investigation will establish, you're the police. Do you understand how incompetent that sounds, or frightening that sounds to say, we've got the end result here, and we're just going to make the evidence back up that end result. At best, that sounds incompetent, and worse, that's really damning. But lo and behold, the Las Vegas Police Department said they investigated themselves, and that nothing is in evidence that shows what the Michael Bennett allegations were. So the Las Vegas Police Department has essentially said that the Las Vegas Police Department did nothing wrong. And in the video that they released, there's 126 videos that have been released. The one that could actually get to the heart of this matter, of those 126 videos, none of them actually actually take apart Michael Bennett's complaint. Bennett's complaint was that when he was originally contacted by a police officer, that the police officer told him that if he didn't get down, he was going to blow his effing head off, and treated him really poorly during that initial contact. There is no video of that. There is no video at all because the officer who was there, his body cam wasn't on. And so they don't have the video of that, but they said they might look at and investigate as to why the officer didn't have his body camera on and then give him, the little slap on the wrist, make sure you turn it back on. The critical part here of what Michael Bennett's alleging, there's no video to say that that didn't happen or that did happen. It's not there. So for the Las Vegas Police Department to come out and say that they didn't do anything wrong when there's no actual video evidence, one way or the other, is, again, disconcerting and frightening. We also had allegations of racism in the NFL, with the Washington, D.C. franchise taking on the Kansas City franchise, both of which have native iconography in their names, one of them being a racial slur. Washington wide receiver Terrell Pryor said that a Kansas City fan called him the N-word, so Pryor flipped him off. The NFL has said that they're investigating the situation and they will ban the fan. The league also then said there is, quote, no tolerance for racial comments directed at anyone, close quote. Except for, the Washington, D.C. franchise team name, which is a dictionary-defined racial slur. But there is no tolerance for racial comments towards anyone. Unless you're the name of the franchise that's making lots and lots and lots of money for the league. Then they're apparently perfectly okay with that. I don't know if they're just completely self-aware or that they've further gotten to the idea that in 2017, irony is dead. Cam Newton is also in the news. The Carolina Panthers quarterback was asked about receivers running routes by a female reporter, and during that, he said it was funny for him to hear about a female asking about running routes. And he very rightly got raked over the coals. He very rightly got criticized, and there's a lot of awesome commentary out there from a number of people like Julie DeCaro, Lindsey Gibbs, the crew at Burn It All Down, Shireen Ahmed, Katie Barnes of ESPN, who are really taking the point on this issue. And it was a really positive experience for someone like me to sit and listen and read what it is they had to say about it, and then signal boost their work and signal boost it and suggest that people go out and read it, because I'm never going to be a woman in the sports world. I'm never going to be a woman sports writer. I'm never going to be a woman sports reporter. And I'm not going to have to navigate that kind of situation. And so being able to see their statements and put them out there, because it gets really weird when you have a bunch of guys all sitting there talking about how sexism is bad and that's it. But yesterday, Sarah Spain of 670 The Score and ESPN retweeted a video of a young girl doing a quick demonstration of, hey, Cam, here's the different kinds of routes that they run in football. And she explained all the different routes and telling Cam to pay attention, that she knew what routes were. And it was a really lighthearted move to push back against Cam's comments. But then there was these grown adult men, tweeting at this little girl in the video, asking her about pre-snap reads and the different kinds of coverage, of zone coverage and nickel coverage, and all these other details in football. Grown men trying to show that a preteen girl doesn't really know about football. It's really showing how fragile masculinity is. When do we get to call a bunch of these alpha males a bunch of triggered snowflakes if they got triggered by this little 9-10-year-old girl doing a hilarious video about routes? And to his credit, Cam apologized. And Cam apologized in an actual apology. It was not one of those, I'm sorry if you were offended by kind of comments where it puts the onus on the person who was offended, not the person who actually did it. That he actually really apologized, and that when he knows better, he'll do better. Saying, quote, after careful thought, I understand that my word choice was extremely degrading and disrespectful to women. And to be honest, that was not my intention. And if you're a person who took offense to what I said, I sincerely apologize to you. I'm a man who tries to be a positive role model to my community and tries to use my platform to inspire others. I take ownership to everything that comes with that, and what I did was extremely unacceptable. I'm a father of 2 beautiful daughters. And at their age, I try to instill in them that they can do and be anything they want to be. And the fact that during this whole process, I've already lost sponsors and countless fans. I realized that the joke is really on me, and I've learned a valuable lesson from this. And to the young people who see this, I hope that you learn something as well. Don't be like me, be better than me. And to the reporters and the journalists, to the moms, super moms, to the daughters and sisters and the women all around the world, I sincerely apologize and hope you can find the kindness in your heart to forgive me. Thank you. And that's how you apologize. That is it. That is how you apologize for something that you've done wrong. And it's nice to see Cam actually apologize, that we can lay into him and lay into him and lay into him. I don't think it's going to have any kind of real effect. But the fact that he's recognizing what he did was wrong and being able to try to fix that is an important thing. You've been listening to Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, left sports media. We've just been discussing the protests in the NFL surrounding the national anthem and taking a knee. We've also talked about the lack of self-awareness in the NFL on racial issues and just how fragile masculinity is. Coming up in just a moment, we'll be talking with author and journalist Brian Dolinar about his recent article on the Detroit Pistons owner buying up a prison communications company. And so we're going to get right into that with our talk this week in NBA News. Okay, with us in studio is Brian Dolinar. Brian is the program director of the Urbana-Champaign Independent Media Center and writer for the Public Eye, the Urbana-Champaign Independent Media Center's newspaper. He also writes for Truth Out, where he recently published an article called Profiting Off Mass Incarceration, Detroit Pistons Owner Buys Prison Phone Company, about Tom Gores, who owns the Pistons and is the founder of Platinum Equity, which has put in a bid for Securus Technologies and Communications worth $1.5 billion. Brian's also a part of the Illinois Campaign for Prison Phone Justice, which has lobbied the Federal Communications Commission and passed 2 bills in Illinois. So, Brian, for those who are uninitiated, what is Securus Technologies?
Yeah, Neil, thanks for having me, and happy to talk about this. Neil and I are both co-facilitators at the Public Eye newspaper. Shout out to the Public Eye crew. Securus is one of the 2 largest prison phone companies in the country. You know, people know about large prison builders, constructors, CCA and the GO Group. But lesser known are the many other services that companies make vast profits on. These are health providers like Wexford. These people provide towels for the kitchens like Aramark.
They also provide a bunch of the food for the prisons.
The food for prisons and jails. As well, there's the prison phone companies. They provide what is really a lifeline for many families to their loved ones incarcerated, phone connection. And so people talk on the phone, weekly, in some cases daily, and that comes at a cost. The calls can cost anywhere from $2 to $15. In the case of Flint, Michigan, they cost $17 for a 15-minute phone call. Flint is not far from where Pistons owner Tom Gores grew up. And just as a bit of a transition, I also wanted to point out, I don't know if you watched Tom Gores' Twitter feed, but he's been getting trashed recently for his buying of the company Securus. And he's also come out publicly stating he's in some kind of vague support of players speaking out, whether it be kneeling or whatnot. He put out on Twitter a statement saying America's most treasured values are equality and diversity, blah, blah, blah. We care deeply about our community and our players. He says we support their right to raise awareness in a manner they believe is both thoughtful and impactful. He doesn't actually say, that he's tired of seeing black men shot down in the streets by police. But it's this kind of vague support of
Well, you saw that from a lot of these sports owners, these kind of vague statements of like what Donald Trump said was divisive and largely just putting it on like the one guy rather than the systemic issue at hand.
Right. So Gores is doing the same thing, and he kind of portrays himself as a kind of good guy. He's this kind of like investment mogul guy. He's offices for Platinum Equity, this large investment firm, are in Beverly Hills. He's a slick L.A. guy who shows up on the scene in L.A. Sharply dressed and with a little stubble beard and nice haircut. He portrays himself as somebody who wants to do good for the community. So when Flint's water supply was exposed for being toxic, he pledged to raise $10 million for Flint. So he and in buying the Pistons, which he did a couple years ago, he kind of touted this again as something that was good for Detroit. He was trying to, help bring Detroit around.
Yeah, he was going to try to bring the team back from the Palace at Auburn Hills to downtown Detroit again, that this was going to be part of Detroit's revitalization to bring the team back to Detroit.
Right. And I talked to several activists on the ground for the article that ran in Truth Out last week. Several activists on the ground who talked about making of this what they're calling New Detroit, and how really it's for the benefit of white property-owning ruling class, white suburbanites coming back into the city, and really not for the larger community. Of course, anybody who's been through Detroit can see the neighborhoods, just entire swaths of the city, totally abandoned, overgrown lots, houses falling down, roofs sideways. And so, again, it's part of this sort of bipolar society that we live in, that we think we can revive cities and at the same time trash them.
Yeah, we can revive cities by making massively public-funded stadiums to have teams come to. That this has largely been something we've been seeing in the sports world for the last 30-odd years or so, since the Reagan presidency, that anything even remotely getting to public infrastructure has just been publicly funded stadiums.
Right, absolutely. And I talked to David Leonard, who you suggested speaking with, Neil, and he writes. He's a professor who writes about sports and race, and talked about how basketball stadiums, stadium sports in general, are used to forward gentrification in cities across the country, largely to the benefit of real estate giants getting hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks from directly out of the pockets of ordinary tax-paying residents in Detroit and other cities.
Well, in the city of Detroit itself, they negotiated themselves out of a good deal into one that just gave deference to the billionaire owners of the Detroit Red Wings and to the Detroit Pistons now. That they sold the land for the stadium for $1. Not $1 million, not $100 million, $1, the bill with George Washington on it, like 100 pennies they sold it for. They also, in the Joe Louis Arena, had part of the revenue stream coming to them from concessions and other things. And they negotiated their way out of that. That, that revenue stream? No, we don't need that anymore. We're just cash-strapped Detroit that went bankrupt. We don't have money for our schools and stuff. We don't need this revenue coming in. You guys can have that back.
Right.
And with security companies like Securus, that are these technology companies, over the past few years, what's the trend been for some of these companies like Securus in their profit margins and the valuations of these companies?
Yeah, they've been growing by leaps and bounds. We hear about reform efforts to the criminal justice system and bipartisan committees to bring down mass incarceration numbers. But they're still bringing big rewards for investors. And my friend and comrade, fellow writer James Kilgore, and I wrote an article last year where we talked about the creation of these carceral conglomerates. These prison phone companies are merging with electronic monitoring companies, are merging with the money transfer companies.
JPay being probably the most famous.
JPay, one of them. And these companies are being bought up by these large hedge funds and consolidated. And then increasingly we see a monopolization in the market. GTL, Securus' competitor, is buying up what is the third largest phone company, T-Netics. And so we see, exactly what Marx said occurs with capitalism. You have concentration, monopoly capitalism. You see this concentration of wealth into a few hands and a few large companies. And this is happening within the prison industrial complex as we know it in the United States.
Now, during the Obama administration, in October of 2015, the Federal Communications Committee, the FCC, had put a maximum cap on phone call rates for incarcerated people with, I believe, it was just a few cents per minute that they put it at. Since the Obama administration ended in January 2017, President Donald J. Trump took over, and we've got the new FCC commissioner, Ajit Pai. What's been Ajit Pai's moves on this, and does he have any kind of relationship with Securus Technologies or any kind of interests in seeing Securus be able to be a massive profiteer?
Yeah, Ajit Pai, I've been watching FCC Commission for a few years, and when I first saw this guy, I was like, this is just a real crackpot nut job. Just real crazy. And here he is, head of the FCC. It's just kind of mind-blowing. This guy was mostly ranting about contraband cell phones getting into prisons. Now, why are people taking real risks to smuggle in phones to prisons and jails? Because the costs of damn calls are too expensive. Maybe you could lower the cost of phone calls to reduce the number of contraband cell phones. Okay. This is this guy's kind of rationale. This is his campaign.
Didn't he force the FCC's lawyers to not defend the October 2015 decision?
Yeah, so he was installed pretty early as the new head of the FCC. And within days of his appointment, he told the lawyers to back off the lawsuit. And just to back up here a little bit, there was a lawsuit that was filed almost 20 years ago now by Martha Wright, a grandmother who wanted to be able to talk to her grandson, a black woman who started the campaign around prison phone justice. She spoke up, signed off on a lawsuit. Pro bono attorneys took it up, and eventually this became the case of the Wright petitioners, and they campaigned for several years to try to get this in front of a national body. The lawsuit was referred to the FCC. The FCC took it up. There's a commissioner who's really been a champion for the cause named Minion Clyburn. She's an African-American woman who's a commissioner at the FCC who's really fought this cause. She, in 2015, got the vote through the FCC, as well as the chairman, Tom Wheeler, pushed this through the FCC, got a vote, and passed sweeping regulations in 2015 for intrastate calls. The large number of phone calls that take place happen within state lines. In 2013, FCC had ruled on interstate calls across state lines. And these two votes really set a precedent and were the culmination of a lot of hard work of people on the ground fighting mass incarceration at tooth and nail, really. And so after the 2015 decision, we all, threw big parties and congratulated ourselves and thought that we had won, only to have Trump elected come in and immediately reverse this decision. Clearly, this was a top priority, and it says something about the importance of the issue. I think this was one of the first things for Trump to go after. But so it is a real kind of nitty-gritty kind of everyday campaign against mass incarceration that people are waging across the country at all kinds of state and local levels. I can remind you that in 2004, 2005, we fought this campaign in Champaign County. We've heard about the expensive phone calls at the local jail here, the Champaign County Jail. There were 3 suicides at the jail within a year, in 2004, 2005. And one of those cases was of a guy who got his phone calls cut off. They ran up the bills. They got too expensive. They got the phone cut off. The guy commits suicide a day later. So we had heard about this, and we found out about these large commissions that the phone companies like Securus give to local authorities, people running the prisons. And in Champaign County here, we were getting $14,000 a month commission off the phone calls. So let's say if they can hand out $14K a month, that tells you what kind of profits they're making.
Yeah, and the stocks of a lot of these private prison companies and private security companies have gone massively up since the election. As you mentioned in the article, some of them more than doubled since Trump's election. And a few years ago, we had members of the Stop Alcatraz campaign on when Geo Group was trying to buy the naming rights to Florida Atlantic University's football stadium. And they were highlighting a lot of Geo Group's really horrendous private prison profiteering tactics. And with Tom Gore's largely kind of taking this narrative of bringing Detroit back and, dare I say, making Detroit great again. Like, where that phrase being incredibly loaded as it is in the first place. But that whole idea of the significant public investment going towards the new stadium, going towards the prisons and the county jail that you mentioned that's being built, that a lot of this funding is being prioritized towards those sorts of venues. Is there a campaign being started to push back against Gore's purchase to try to get him to sell Securus off? Or is there any kind of campaign to kind of morally pressure Tom Gore's of, if you're saying that you're doing all these things to, help Detroit, that profiteering off of people who are incarcerated and the huge amounts of people who are incarcerated, as you mentioned in your article, in the city of Detroit and the surrounding areas in the state of Michigan, doesn't really fit with his philanthropic image. So is there any kind of campaign that's been starting to kind of push back against this move of Gore's actually making the purchase? Yeah,
we've run a couple petitions against Gore's, part of our national partners in the Campaign for Prison Phone Justice. After my story ran, a local weekly progressive newspaper picked it up in Detroit. And then there's been a couple people on Twitter who are just bombing Tom Gore's Twitter account with all these articles and petitions. And somebody ran their own petition of who supports, and it's like, 80% of the people want him to sell off Securus. The deal has not gone through yet, but the story is getting some traction. It's I checked out his Tom Gore's Twitter account, and you'll see several iterations of the issue on here. So. I think it says something to the strength of the national campaign that's been built up over 20 years. There are a lot of people out there who are starting to become aware of this issue. And if you have anybody who's been locked up and you got one of those $15 phone calls, you're going to remember it.
If people want more information about prison communication profiteering or Tom Gore's purchase of Securus and these wider issues that we've been talking about, prison profiteering and the kind of carceral conglomerates, what groups, what sites might you mention or refer them to?
The Campaign for Prison Phone Justice, if you Google that, there's a couple of things. There's a national map that's been put together by our friends at the Human Rights Defense Center. That's the folks who put out the Prison Legal News, Paul Wright and folks. They put together a national map, so you can click on any state and find out what are the phone rates for their prisons, some of their cities. They have contracts. Everything that we got from our Illinois campaign we gave over to them and they put up online. So we filed FOIAs for some 25 phone contracts in the largest counties, including Cook County, Champaign County, the collar counties around Chicago. We got all those phone contracts and put them up online. So there's lots of data out there that we already have. There's several articles out about the issue. But the Campaign for Prison Phone Justice, if you Google that, or our campaign website is the Illinois Campaign for Prison Phone Justice.
Well, thank you much, Brian Dolinar. He recently wrote an article for Truth Out about Tom Gores and his purchase of Securus Technologies called Profiting Off Mass Incarceration. Detroit Pistons owner buys prison phone company. So thank you very much, Brian, for coming on. We do really appreciate it. You've been listening to Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, Left Sports Media. And we've just been discussing Brian Dolinar's article in Truth Out about the Detroit Pistons owner Tom Gores buying up prison profiteering company Securus Technologies and the damage that it's having. Coming up on Not Another Sports Show, we'll be analyzing some college sports news like the FBI case, as well as NYPD officer James Frascatore being mad at a person he wrongfully arrested. That seems like it should be the opposite way around there. In unpaid college sports news, 5 New Mexico football players, Stanley Barnwell Jr., Kimmy Carson, Garrett Hughes, Elijah Lilly, and Michael Sewell Jr., took a knee during the national anthem. In the post-game conference, they said, quote, "We took a knee for something we believe in. We took a knee to stand with Kaepernick against injustice in America right now. We didn't do it to disrespect the flag. There was honestly no negative connotation with the kneel. It was a positive protest. We took a knee for something we believe in." Their head coach, Bob Davie, joined them during the post-game press conference and then said, quote, "I support them 100%. They had every right to do that legally, morally, ethically. I feel more strongly now than ever that our football team is unified and that our football team is really a big part of the solution moving forward, not the problem." And so, interesting to see the head coach there being supportive of them and making this kind of statement in support. I mean, arguably, the coach probably couldn't do that and then expect to recruit anybody in the future. But we've also had the bribery scandal. This has come out. The FBI spent 2 years investigating and has had multiple arrests of 10 people, including some NCAA Division I basketball assistant coaches. The allegations include that the coaches took money in exchange for trying to convince players to sign with certain companies and certain individuals when they became pros, and others include Adidas trying to use money to get it to players and their families. Because, shock of shocks, players got paid. That's the bad thing that we can't be having. USC, Auburn, Oklahoma State, and Arizona have had assistant coaches arrested. Louisville is in the process of trying to get rid of their athletic director, Tom Jurich, and their head coach, Rick Pitino. And as this scandal, this entire scandal, could be completely avoided, could be completely removed if we, and yes, fans, say it with me, paid the players. A company paying money to top players to get them to sign somewhere. A company paying money to top players to get them to sign someplace. Outside of the NCAA, we call that an endorsement deal. Outside of the NCAA, we call that an endorsement. That they sign a corporate endorsement deal. Outside of the NCAA, that's what we call it. Inside the NCAA, it's an impermissible benefit, and it's terribly and horribly wrong, and no good, and very bad. And how dare the athletes get any kind of money from any kind of thing when it's the adults and the profiteers that need to make all the money here. So that's the issue. And the fact that these coaches are alleged to have taken money to try to steer these people someplace is just another instance where the adults are allowed to make money. The adults are allowed to be exploitative of the athletes and making sure the players don't see a dime. Everybody here is getting paid except the athletes. Everybody in this is getting paid except the athletes. The coaches are making a bunch of money off of this. The athletic directors are making a bunch of money off of this. The corporations and the agents and the special talent recruitment firms are making money off of this series. Everybody but the actual players who are doing the actual work. And that when the players started to get money, that's when the problem came here. That's when the NCAA got mad. That's when the FBI began investigating and wants to call this bribery. No, it's not really bribery. It's paying the players. And we get rid of all of these kinds of scandals if you set up a system to pay the players. You set up a system to pay the players for it. we get rid of all of these massive scandals. We get rid of all of these problems. In August, athletic director Tom Jurich of the University of Louisville announced a 10-year, $160 million deal with Adidas to start in July 2018. And this is largely because the program is having some financial difficulties. That the tax increment financing deal that they set up for their stadium is coming under their projections. That they projected a certain amount of money to come in. They are not seeing that amount of money actually come in. They are not seeing that amount of money nearly at all come in. And so it was found out that it was designed to be way too high in the projections, that the projections were designed to be way too high. And so now the taxpayers, originally stuck with a $206 million price tag for their stadium, are now caught with a $309 million price tag for that stadium. The program also accepts $7 million per year from student fees, and the $7 million a year in student fees that are going to the athletic department at a time that the University of Louisville is facing layoffs of employees and a $48 million budget shortfall. $7 million, almost a sixth of the budget shortfall is going to cover athletic director costs and athletic department costs. And we've learned from the great reporting at the Courier-Journal that athletic director Tom Jurich gets to make some of his compensation tax-free because the school paid the taxes for him to the tune of $1.6 million in 2016. They also paid 160% of the cost of his life insurance policy and allowed him to keep the overage. They also paid him as much as $30,000 per year to hire financial advisors to help him manage money, as well as paying the taxes on it. They provided him $12,000 per year to cover the cost of 2 vehicles. They bought him 2 memberships at private golf clubs, where membership fees are $28,000 and $25,000 respectively, as well as membership at the university's own Cardinal Club course. They pay his annual club dues and cover his required monthly minimum bar and food bill at a total of $11,260. They also provide him with 16 Sky Terrace seats each year for the Kentucky Derby and Oaks. Those seats would sell for $24,000 per year. They've also guaranteed him 8 football and basketball season tickets for life. The seats, valued about $11,500 per year, are property of his family for the lifetime of him, his wife, and their kids. No wonder you're running into a budget shortfall and you need $7 million of public funds to help cover that. And we've seen that happen. Walter Byers has mentioned this so many times. Walter Byers, the former head of the NCAA, one of the originators of the NCAA, noted in his book, "The trick is to overspend and feed the myth that even the industry's plutocrats teeter on insolvency. At the heart of the problem is an addiction to lavish spending." And that's what we see here. In fact, 98% of the current Adidas deal went to pay head coach Rick Pitino. That this deal, which was meant to give money for the athletic department and for the team, that of the deal that they currently have with Adidas, 1 year, $25,000 went to the team. $1.5 million went to Rick Pitino. Another year, $10,000 went to the team. $1.5 million went to Rick Pitino. We can apparently have the adults making all the money all over the place, but how dare we possibly ever pay the players, apparently? Because paying the players would somehow break this system, even though it's horrifically broken and problematic and being investigated by the FBI. We're going to close out really quickly with some other sports news. And in other sports news, we have got an update about James Blake. The former tennis star was tackled to the ground and wrongfully arrested by Officer James Frascatore of the NYPD in 2015. Blake testified in court that the officer did not identify himself and that although the officer claims otherwise, he did not apologize when the mistake was recognized. Frascatore has an extensive history of poor conduct. For instance, trying not to even log the stop after they realized that they messed up. He has 6 racial profiling complaints against him and at least 4 excessive force lawsuits against him. In fact, in this case with James Blake, the panel of the NYC's Police Review Board noted that he used excessive force. Democracy Now! Has had interviews with the survivors of Frascatore's violence and talking about how a man was beaten and harassed and maced because he dared to ride his bike on a sidewalk. His wife was arrested for not immediately getting the bike out of the house. And, of course, all the charges were dropped in that case. There was another case where they arrested a guy and charged him with assault on a police officer because Frascatore had cut his hand, which he claimed came when the person bit him. Medical evidence, and even Frascatore's own admission, said that it was because Frascatore punched the guy in the mouth and his hand was cut on a tooth, throwing the blow at the man's head. Blake settled with the city over this complaint in exchange for the city creating a fellowship to deal with police misconduct. But now, this week, Officer Frascatore has announced that he is suing James Blake. He is suing Blake's book publisher, the City of New York, and the NYPD for continuing to talk about the arrests and making these supposedly false statements about Officer Frascatore. Incredibly problematic on a number of different levels. And in World Cup news, a new Human Rights Watch report is out talking about the workers in Qatar. Currently, workers are kept from outside work between 11:30 a.m. and 3 o'clock p.m. during June 15th to August 31st. But the weather isn't necessarily just, magically better after August 31st. And so the Human Rights Watch report is starting to demand that there actually be paying attention to weather reporting and the real weather reporting rather than simply just having these kind of arbitrary dates or arbitrary deadlines. The Human Rights Watch report is also mandating that they would like public data on migrant worker deaths and the causes of those migrant worker deaths to be investigated. Because in much of the data, the most recent data we have is from 2013, the causes of death have never really been identified. They noted in the report, quote, Qatar's 2022 FIFA World Cup organizers, the quasi-governmental Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy in 2016, mandated work-to-rest ratios commensurate with the risk posed by heat and humidity for the workers building stadiums for the tournament, close quote. Great, then let's do that for everybody. FIFA can leverage that for all of these workers if it really wanted to, and have a real positive benefit if it really wanted to. And it's on us fans to make sure that happens. You've been listening to Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, Left Sports Media, a weekly news hour highlighting the intersections overlapping the world of sports, activism, and radical politics. We again want to thank Brian Dolinar, activist and journalist, coming on to talk with us about his most recent article for Truth Out, where he wrote about profiting off mass incarceration. Detroit Pistons owner buys prison phone company, and talking about those issues related to Tom Gores, the Detroit Pistons owner, buying Securus Technologies. We are available for broadcast by Pacifica Radio member network stations, college and community radio stations, and low-power FM stations, as many already are. If you can't listen live or you happen to miss any of today's show, we are available via audio podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and the Google Play Store, or at nasradicalsports.com. And for all of us here at the show, this has been Not Another Sports Show, a radical at the world of sports, Left Sports Media. We will be back with you next week. And please remember that Tuesday, October 17th at 7 p.m. at Gregory Hall, room 112, will be a Domestic Violence Awareness Month keynote talk by Julie DeCaro, a Chicago sports writer and sports commentator with a background as an attorney for domestic violence, having been targeted with online harassment for courageous writing about athletes with allegations of gender-based violence. Julie DeCaro will speak on campus about the intersections of Chicago athletics, sexual assault, domestic violence, and what we can do about it. This program is free and open to the public. For more information, contact McLay1 at illinois.edu or 217-333-3137.